Voice of the Sea, learning from experts across the ocean.
Welcome to Voice of the Sea.
This time on Voice of the Sea, we're at the SOEST biannual open house, learning about the deep sea with oceanographer Jeff Drazen. We'll learn about the creatures of the deep and how we study them.
There's about 200 species of anglerfishes worldwide, about distributed across roughly a dozen different families. And some of them have this strategy with the parasitic males and some of them don't.
How frequent is to find a new species down there?
It is very, very common to find new species in the deep sea. The deep,
Or
everything. It is less common to find new species of fish, but it does happen. We have found several new species of fish here in Hawaiian waters. The deep sea is an enormous ecosystem. It is the largest living space on our planet, and it is the least explored. So it's very remote, hard to get to, and that's the reason. And so as you can imagine, every time you do get a chance to go and sample the deep sea, you have a high probability of finding something new. We have found several new species of fish here in the Hawaiian Islands, and we have found either a new species of crab or a species of crab that was only known off of New Zealand before. There's another fish that we found at a roughly 4,000 meters, which as far as we can tell, it's a species that's been documented from the North Atlantic. So this is a massive extension of its known range. It lives here in the North Pacific. It's much more common to find new species of small things. So if you were to take a sediment core, a chunk of mud from the abyssal plain here, you might find in that sediment 100 individuals of little worms and small crustaceans and things like that, and a quarter to half of them might be new to science. So the discovery rate is really high, really, really high. So high that we have many more species that we know are new than we have taxonomists to actually describe them to help us understand all of their relationships and how to identify them. Just recently, which is quite interesting though, is that the diets of these animals and the way that they fit in the food webs changes with depth. So some of these animals, which can be found very much closer to the surface than others, they typically are at a lower trophic position, a lower trophic level, and that the ones that live at much greater depths are a much higher trophic level. And so we don't really understand exactly what's going on there. We've discovered this through the use of stable isotopes, but which we'll talk about later. But the deeper water individuals seem to be much more predatory, or at least are eating animals that are higher up in the trophic level than the shallow living animals, and we really don't know why. The other thing that we have discovered in our lab is that these animals, some of them, have a lot of mercury, and it depends a great deal on what depths they live in. The deepest living ones have much more mercury than the shallowest living ones. And this translates up the food web to us.
Right.
So when you find animals that we eat, like swordfish, and they dive to very great depths, they eat these smaller fishes which have high mercury, they have high mercury. Swordfish have very high mercury concentrations. The same is true of many other deeper predators like opa and monchong and big-eye tuna, which we call generically ahi. Whereas some of the shallower living and foraging predators like mahi-mahi and yellowfin tuna and aku. Yellowfin tuna, of course, is also called ahi. And these animals forage mostly in the top couple hundred meters of the water column. They eat a whole different suite of animals. They eat juvenile reef fishes, they eat flying fishes, other things. They don't have a lot of mercury.
Interesting.
And so where an animal feeds in the water column directly determines how much mercury they're going to have in their bodies.
And that's really important for us to understand.
That's very important for us to understand for the human health aspects. And that's it has a big bearing on what we harvest, what we decide to consume, how much mercury there is.
Does the mercury, to your knowledge, affect the fishes themselves?
We do not think that the mercury in the fishes is affecting them. right now. We don't know for sure, but what we do know is that mercury in tunas was studied about 30 years ago here in Hawaiian waters, and we have looked at mercury in tunas, and so has another scientist called John Kaneko here in Hawaiian waters just recently over the last few years, and those mercury concentrations have not increased. They are the same. So there's a suggestion that whatever these mercury levels are, they may very well be natural levels. They may not be enhanced by our burning of coal and waste products being flushed into the ocean and deposited from the air.
But we're just now becoming increasingly aware of the health concerns from having too much mercury.
We are. Too much mercury leads to a number of negative health benefits and ultimately toxicity, which can kill you. And eating too much mercury-laden fish can lead to these toxicity situations. But another interesting finding is that a lot of these deeper living fishes, which have lots of mercury in them, they also have lots of selenium. Now, selenium forms part of the molecules in our bodies that help us function the way we normally function. What mercury does when we eat mercury is it binds to that selenium, and all the molecules that have the selenium in it stop working. That's the toxicity, the mercury toxicity. It turns out that these swordfish and tunas that have lots of mercury also have lots of selenium. This may be the way they naturally have evolved to cope with high mercury concentrations. So the question then becomes, if you eat a piece of swordfish and it has high mercury, but it also has high selenium, is this really bad for you? And we still are not entirely clear as to what the answer is.
Gotcha.
But the interesting part from the food web perspective is this mercury is entering the food web at great depths. It's entering between 600 and 1,000 meters, we think, and that may be because we have a low oxygen zone here in Hawaii, and that may favor the bacteria that take the elemental mercury, the metal form of mercury, and make it available to animals. They change its formation, they methylate it, and then it can enter food webs. And that may be why all of these deep living fishes have lots of mercury in them. And it just makes its way up to the food web to us.
Very interesting.
But how does the
This is called a dragonfish, and he's kind of beat up. The way that we collect a lot of these animals is we drag a big net behind the ship, and that scoops up all the animals. And this guy got tossed around a little bit, and he's missing a lot of his skin. But he's a good specimen because I can show you a really interesting adaptation that a lot of deep sea fishes have. They have huge mouths. You see how big this mouth is? Now, the advantage of that is that if you live in a place that doesn't have a lot of food, whatever you come across, whether it be little or big, you stand a chance of eating it. So you can greatly increase how much food you get to eat. So you see a lot of that in deep water animals. They are, and I'm going to show you a squid here, does the same thing. This is a shallow water squid. It's got a big body. This is the part we eat. It becomes calamari. And it's got all of its arms. And that's a shallow living one. This is a deep sea squid. It's very much like that anglerfish. He's got a little tiny body and a really big head, just like that anglerfish that I showed you. Tiny little body, really big head. And he has little lights out on the tips of his tentacles and arms. And actually he's got lights all down most of his body. And he can use these and blink these on and off and attract food to his tentacles, and he can grab it and eat it. Yeah, there's lights on that poster on the arm tips of that squid as well. So that lots of different animals have these kinds of strategies. So this is one of the largest anglerfishes I've ever caught. Just to give you an idea, they don't get huge. But if you're a floating head, you don't have a lot of swimming capability, and you live in a very sparsely populated environment, it becomes very hard to find a mate. And there's a number of strategies that deep sea animals use to overcome this problem. But floating heads don't actively swim towards each other, and if the distances between individuals are hundreds or even 1,000 meters, this is a real challenge. What anglerfishes have done is the males have developed into these large animals with the lighted lures that are the big predators. The males, on the other hand, They hatch out of the eggs.
Can you say that again? Because you said the males were the big ones.
Where I need to start over? The females are the large individuals, and they have the lighted lures and the big teeth and the fangs. The males are small, and they both develop from eggs up near the surface, actually, and they feed on plankton for a short period of their life. The females then start to develop and descend into deep water, turning into these large animals that I have before you. The males, however, they stay very small. They don't get any bigger than maybe about a centimeter or so, and they have very, very large nostrils, and they can smell the females, which emit pheromones. And their sole purpose, they stop feeding, their sole purpose is to find a mate. When they do find a female, they attach to her with their teeth, and you can see inside this jar there's a little appendage hanging off of the female. That is the male. Can you see that right there? And the body of the male and the female fuse. The skin fuses, the circulatory system fuses, all of the digestive organs of the male degenerate, its eyes degenerate, and it becomes a little parasite hanging off of the female. The advantage of this is that while it may be difficult to find a mate in the deep sea, you only have to find a mate once, and they're effectively a hermaphrodite at that stage. So,
And I guess hormones anymore?
I think the maximum is something like 7 or 8 males attached to one female.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but oftentimes you find females like these, and there are no males attached at all. So, you know, the average is maybe 1 or 2 males attached to a female. But for these fishes, they come from deep water, and there is a size limit in that all fish have to be at least a pound to be sold on the commercial market. Usually the small fishes die, and so there really are no size limits in this fishery. This is another reason why protecting particular areas could be a very effective means of managing the stocks.
And they die just because once you bring them from that deep.
They explode. To put it very simply, they burst. Not all of them, but a large number of them.
And that's just because of the pressure change from so deep.
Right.
They're under so much
They're
pressure.
under pressure. They have this gas-filled space inside of them. That's how they can float in the water without having to swim all the time. And when you bring them up, that gas expands, and it's a very gruesome sight.
The Curriculum Research and Development Group in the College of Education at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. CRDG's training roots go back over 40 years. Through professional development programs, curriculum workshops, research on teaching methodology, individualized school and district training, and so much more. The Curriculum Research and Development Group, improving schools, improving education. CRDG.
Noaa Pacific Services Center, linking people to information and technology. The Pacific Services Center wants you to be prepared for any weather emergency and know your tsunami risk. Noaa Pacific Services Center, enriching life through science, service, and stewardship.
Exploring Our Fluid Earth is the dynamic curriculum developed by the University of Hawaii's Curriculum Research and Development Group. The award-winning Fluid Earth and Living Ocean textbooks are now interactive and online. New activities, updated content, and a teacher community. Exploring Our Fluid Earth is now freely available. Find out more at exploringourfluidearth.org.
The University of Hawaii Sea Grant College Program, helping coastal communities of Hawaii and the Pacific through research, education, and outreach. Serving the community from elementary to graduate students. Hawaii Sea Grant.